Greetings, stranger. Welcome back. Are you ready for the Puddles? Well, if not, you are in good company. Absalom's most impoverished district is difficult to prepare oneself for. In a city as large as this, its poverty is enough to inhabit a space the size of a large town. Come, it is best not to delay. I have timed our tour to be around low tide, when the water levels are at their lowest, but you should still be ready for the omnipresent ankle-high water, even around the district's higher locations. Calf or even knee-high water is more typical these days, and at high tide, the district becomes flooded completely. All the buildings are permanently waterlogged, riddled with mould, and the smell of decay hangs in the air. Indeed, some of the buildings are not technically buildings at all, but the hulls of upturned ships donated by careless captains to the flotsam graveyard and washed into the district at the harbour's low points. And all of this is exacerbated by the gangs and even cults that make the docks look like child's play. Well, if you still wish to accompany me, then hop back onto the carriage. We won't be able to drive very deep into the Puddles, even at low tide. It would be an invitation for robbery. However, we are fortunate today. A low tide has coincided with noon, so it is as safe as we could hope for, given the circumstances. My proposed route is as follows. We will enter the district westwards, along the road that leads to Fort Tempest, then swing eastwards back to the Puddles portion of the port. From there we will continue our journey deeper into the district whilst skirting its edge, before swapping our carriage for our own legs as we reach the little inner sea. We will then be able to head directly towards the Westgate district, more or less along main ways, viewing some of the Puddle's most characteristic locations as we do, eventually leaving it behind us to the relative luxury of Westgate, which will hit us like a grain flail. Thus will my tour continue unimpeded. So, let's begin. Now, while we head up Temple Row and along the road to Fort Tempest, permit me please to educate you about the political microcosm that has manifested itself in the neighbourhood. As I have previously mentioned, Absalom is governed by a Grand Council, which is a bicameral system whose power is largely coalesced in its upper chamber, the High Council. It is de jure ruled by Lord Gear of House Gix, but as he has been missing for some years now, de facto governance has instead passed to Winsel Starborn, a local general-turned-politician. The High Council's members do not often interfere in individual districts, however. They are more concerned with the holistic health and maintenance of the city at the centre of the world and its satellites. A quotidian governance is instead overseen by the Low Council, appointment to which is guaranteed only to the chairpersons of each district's own local council, who is called its nomarch. For example, the Docks nomarch is currently Lord Archich of House Durians, who owns the Devil's Own shipyards. At the whims of the High Council, additional seats on the Low Council can be created or destroyed, depending on matters that the councillors feel, in their wisdom, are worthy of representation. It is usual to have only a second district-based seat, though. For example, in my Docks tour, I mentioned that the head of the Pilots' Union, Darabelle Fairwind, has managed to secure for herself a position on the Low Council. However, because she is not the nomarch of the district, that position may be rescinded at any time by the High Council. For reasons of stability, though, these appointments are usually considered annually. The idea is sensible enough, you could say. Let the more powerful authority handle foreign affairs, emergencies, and long-term planning of Absalom, while day-to-day business can be overseen by a less powerful lower chamber. After all, this system allows abuses of power against Absalom citizens to be escalated to an almighty arbiter. but politics is always a fickle friend. For example, what happens when the nomarch of a district believes that they should be the sole councillor for their district and asks for no funding from their appointers? Your answer can be found in the Puddles. The High Council sees fit to ignore the district, permitting a small dictatorship to flourish in Absalom's poorest region. For Nomarch Hygen Topkick stewards a district council of 1, captains its official guard, and, for good measure, is also in charge of the local salvage guild. Topkick's stranglehold over the district has defined its politics for years now. The second low council district representative is Lady Saisha of House Tevinek, and she will be discussed later, but suffice it to say, her heart is not set on the protection of the Puddles beyond ensuring its flooding does not become totally permanent, which would be disruptive to her business dealings. Alright, enough politics for now. Perhaps we should pivot instead to discussing exactly why Absalom even has a flooded district in the first place. As you may have inferred, the Puddles was not always quite as dangerous and quite as aquatic as it is today, though to my knowledge it has always been poor, and it has certainly always been wet. Being adjacent to the docks meant that the district was able to siphon small amounts of trade from incoming merchants, and this has held true especially for cargo that was of a more dangerous or dubious nature. High tide could always cause some flooding, because the area is more or less at sea level, which reduced property value and drove wealthier citizens away from permanent settlement. And so life here continued in modest yet steady harmony for many hundreds of years, until 25 years ago, in 4698, when a powerful earthquake devastated Kortos. Every settlement on the island was damaged, and many citizens lost their lives to collapsing debris. The most significant damage actually occurred in the Precipice Quarter, then called Beldrin's Bluff, as a whole cliff's worth of Absalom was thrown violently into the sea below. Nevertheless, the Puddles perhaps endured the most insidious damage, as the whole district sunk over an inch into the ground. Already at sea level and struggling with flooding, the earthquake could yet turn out to be a slow, painful death sentence for the entire district. Now, in the immediate wake of the disaster, the community spirit to rebuild was strong. In fact, the District Guard, commonly called the Muckruckers but officially named the Muddied Centre Reserve Civilian Corps, is an unpaid volunteer force formed after the earthquake to help regenerate the district. But as time marched ever onwards, and the efforts were thwarted by greed, or by crime, or by sheer dumb luck, the group and district both fell into the current dilapidated state we see emerging before us today. In fact, we have reached our first official stop, marking the border between the docks and the Puddles. This semi-collapsed temple is called the Metro-Cathedral, and it is consecrated in the name of Arbadar, the god of cities, wealth, and the advancement of civilization. As a deity, he is dutiful in his observation of pacts and oaths, and so is honoured here each Oath Day by the playing of the cathedral's pipe organ, a reminder to all Absalom to honour agreements. But despite its regular use, the foundations were damaged so badly in the earthquake that one tower remains toppled. While there are a dozen ways to enter the Puddles, this is the most poignant to my mind. But not every story in this district is one of destruction and decay. Very occasionally, you do come across a tale of triumph against all odds. This unassuming side street, for example, would lead you northwards in the direction of Purewater Home, an orphanage run by an Asimar called Hope. Her personal story is riddled with crime and violence, but at its end she emerged a changed woman, intending to help Puddles' children avoid the worst of the district, which she could not. In this regard she has done remarkably well, for Purewater is kept relatively dry through some combination of alchemical proficiency and just being close to the docks district. On the other hand, I have also been told that the orphanage is used as a staging ground for the firebrands, who have no qualms recruiting the children for their own purposes, noble though they may be. Make of that what you will, but Purewater Home remains one of the safer district locales. This is made doubly impressive by the fact that it also happens to lie next to an abandoned group of buildings that the locals claim is haunted. These are dominated by a disused chapel to Nethys, a dualistic god of magic. While it is certainly haunted, I do not think ghosts are responsible. I suspect some extraplanar energies are prevalent next to such a chapel that might permit forces of the First World or Shadow Plane to manifest themselves. Investigating the chapel could be a rewarding adventure for the more brave or foolish, but we must press ahead with our tour for the moment. Now, the crossroads that we are approaching is the location of a charitable venture, Yargos Mission, funded by the famous elderly scholar and historian Yargos Gil. The mission oversees the distribution of alms and aid to the district's most needy residents. Of course, determining who is most needy in an area as impoverished as the Puddles is no easy task, particularly unsuitable, I think, to the empathetic souls who are drawn to charity work. Thus, the mission often finds itself in the unfortunate position of facing overwhelming demand with insufficient supply. Also, because it is strategically located in the Puddles, and has access to a large group of diverse residents, the mission is frequently targeted by local gangs who attempt to bribe, coerce, or steal what precious resources it does possess. These gangs include the Puddle Jumpers and the Warhounders, though neither is actually headquartered in the Puddles. We'll turn left now and eastwards towards the port area. I should point out to you, in case you didn't spot it while we were at the docks, that a small cliff actually distinguishes the low point of the docks around Temple Row and the low point of the Puddles, which is farther south. Now, why is this notable? Well, the uprise along which we are currently travelling is called Torsen's Moor, and it is home to the best tavern in the district, the Soggy Piper. The meals are mediocre but filling. The drinks are simple but safe. And the people there recognise that the Piper is neutral territory as long as everyone keeps to themselves. Cultists, conspiracists, and criminals can all drink in relative safety here, as, of course, could we. The price of discretion is a rather moody atmosphere inside, though, so if you are looking for a night on the town, you are most certainly in the wrong place. Indeed, in the wrong district. And there we are. Absalom's Port and Docks District are in full view here as we begin the second leg of our journey. I struggle to imagine what it must be like as a local, having to see the staggering wealth that flows from those ships to the docks, warehouses and merchants every day. To call it disheartening may be almost offensively optimistic. However, if we swivel our heads westwards and observe the houses, what do you notice? Try to look past the rot and the violation of every living standard. Look higher. Do you see those catwalks? They are the Puddles residents' answer to the very realistic prospect of needing to live in a permanently flooded home. These planks, acquired from the hulls of washed-up ships no doubt, form bridges, railings and other walkways that permit quite speedy travel around town, provided you are dexterous enough not to lose your balance. It has become something of a local game, to determine who is the fastest runner across the district's rooftops. The winners are often then hired by various factions as messengers and couriers. Of course, this encroachment by factions has started to cause rooftop skirmishes and fights to break out, tragically often between the young and the foolish. Oh, and you should remember not to panic if you see a goblin scurrying along these catwalks. The goblin population in the Puddles is significant and continues to grow, but remember that they are not necessarily the wicked foes of civilization that so many stories would have you believe. Coming up on our right now is one of the driest buildings in the district, despite its proximity to the waterfront. The reasons why should be obvious. It is stone, not wood, and well-maintained stone at that. Moreover, it is propped up on foundational stilts there, see? Those keep it above the water even at high tide. The architect even made sure to create a unique floating stairway to the front doors, which can move with the water level. There is even rooftop access via the catwalks, should the need arise. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this building is called Stilt House, and it serves as the headquarters for Nomarch Topkick, the Muckruckers, and the Salvage Guild. Consequently, this is also the centre of what little trade does occur here. Until recently, the Nomarch was quite effective at accounting for all wealth, monitoring all crime, and most importantly, keeping both contained within the Puddles. However, with more regular flooding, and increasing spillage of crime into the docks and Westgate, and a surge of activism from many of the local youths, Hygen Topkick's position is perhaps not as stable as it once was. Don't get me wrong, Stilt House was always sure to tolerate a degree of chaos, for it enabled the Muckruckers' own extortion and profiteering to appear a necessary evil, but the situation now is becoming untenable. The Nomarch is losing control of his own district, and that is something the Grand Council will not be able to ignore forever. A few years ago, Acting Primarch Starborn took the initiative in reclaiming large parts of the Precipice Quarter from the troubles that had befallen it following the earthquake. So some speculate that he will do the same for the Puddles next. Now take a look at these jetties on our left. Though they are empty currently, you might note that they are in relatively good condition compared to the rotted piers we had been passing. That is because this area of the Puddles' access to the harbour is visited every night by the Barque Bazaar, a floating market overseen by the self-styled market master, Anavi. Technically, a barque is a vessel with at least 3 masts, fore and main both rigged square. However, the bazaar is mostly composed of far smaller vessels that tie themselves to one another with ropes to form a single entity. It is really quite beautiful, and worth witnessing one evening if you can spare the time. You can always watch from the docks if you think the Puddles is too risky. The bazaar is a great source of trade for the district, although many of the items are of dubious nature or quality. And no, I don't mean secret artifacts of eldritch power smuggled into Absalom by some wayward wizard. Rather, I mean last week's fish that is likely to give you food poisoning but unlikely to kill you outright. Anavi might be in over her head though, as she continues to foster ever more complicated relationships with the different Puddles factions. I personally find it unlikely that the bazaar will be able to stay truly neutral for very long, especially given its proximity to Stilt House. Now, recall the name Lady Saisha of House Tervineg, if you can. That's right, she is the second district representative of the Puddles on the Low Council. I promised that she would become relevant again in our tour, and as we approach the lower, more flooded parts of the Puddles, she re-enters the picture from that isolated building there in the distance, the one cornered against Absalom's mighty walls. Well, there is good reason for it to be so lonesome, for that is her private prison called the Brine. If you find yourself in there, then you should consider a quick death a mercy. You see, despite its sturdy stone construction, the brine is designed to allow water to flow directly in from the Flotsam Graveyard and the Puddles through its low doors and holes. These flood the majority of the cells, meaning the prisoners are permanently soaked in water that is beyond stagnant. As you would expect, disease runs rife through that dreaded place. Some infections are almost unique to the Puddles, such as delirium mold or haunt dust, while others are just consequences of living in such inhumane conditions. It is not uncommon for whatever qualifies as a sewage system in the brine to fail and back up, leading to floor-filling water saturated with excrement and sludge. The guards use a catwalk network not dissimilar to the Puddles' rooftop traverses in order to avoid touching the water. And, to top it all off, there is a slavery ring operating out of the brine called the Salt Cartel. Lady Saisha holds dual titles as both High Warden of the prison as well as Trademaster of the cartel, which explains why she is so invested in easy access to her domain. I should contextualize that slavery is currently illegal in Absalom. The city at the center of the world has a long and tumultuous relationship with the practice, and it has been outlawed, legalized, and restricted several times in its history. After the Black Echelon Uprising 6 years ago, the Grand Council finally abolished slavery unconditionally, but people have long memories, and the scars inflicted by Absalom's slave trade could well be permanent. Moreover, something being illegal will not stop it completely, and the Salt Cartel is something of an open secret around here, and yet another reason you should avoid being detained by anyone in the Puddles at all costs. I think I would actually prefer to be incarcerated in the Black Whale than the Brine, because at least the water there is relatively clean. We'll have to leave our carriage now, and here is the reason why. Behold the permanent salt lake, dubbed the Little Inner Sea, the centre of activity in the Puddles. It's over half a mile long in most directions, and holds its own ecosystem both above and below the surface of its putrid water. Every high tide brings into its territory living fish and dead vessels caught in the flotsam graveyard. Some of these, of course, still carry their former owners' valuables and goods, so the residents spend their days and nights fishing for food and items. The Nomarch Salvage Guild dominates this during the day, and does its best to prevent others from participating. The guild also imposes a 20% tax on the value of all recovered loot. Predictably, this means the nights herald little more than a changing of the guard, as private ventures into its waters begin. Regardless, spending any length of time here, even around the water's edge, is quite dangerous, because the Little Inner Sea also doubles as an exotic pet dumping ground for Absalom's wealthy, who pay good coin to get their rampant experiments out of their sight. Consequently, I am not able to say with any confidence just how diverse its ecology is, but I can promise that there will be at least one hungry cryptid lurking beneath its sloshing waves. On its edges, though, you could expect to find your regular, aggressive aquatic animals, as well as a seemingly endless swarm of mosquitoes, many of them vectors for nasty diseases. There are also razor-sharp barnacles bestrewn about the banks, which will penetrate all except the sturdiest of footwear. The cuts and sores left behind are called barnacle rot by the locals, an invitation for all manner of diseases to enter their bodies. Look to its far bank, though, as we begin our journey back towards Westgate. Do you see those tents? Once they were striped in yellows and reds, but the salty winds have bleached them almost white. Those make up Aysepir's Astounded Abyss, a self-styled freak show created by the Fishhead Queen, a merfolk cursed with an inversion of her kin's bodies. For a modest fee, although actually very expensive by Puddle standards, for the Abyss's audiences are usually drawn from people out of district, you too can witness the ghoulish, self-consuming troll, ever gnawing at its regenerating fingers, or the mummy with the still-living eye, whose sinister and accursed gaze entitles you to a consolation prize at the end of the show. If more traditional circus acts are more to your liking, then you could also behold the ignited juggler, who immolates herself with every show. Be careful, though, for while the Fishhead Queen dislikes acts of violence and chaos from disrupting her shows, and business within her territory, she doesn't care much about what her acts do in their own time throughout the rest of the district. So, on occasion, the Abyss can follow you home. Now as we approach these X-shaped crossroads, look to your right and admire the quite unique structure that greets your vision. That nail-like building, flanked by 4 pillars, is the Consulate of the Platinum Band, one of only 2 embassies for the group in all Galarian. The Platinum Band is the largest humanoid church dedicated to worshipping the draconic god Apsu, patron to all metallic dragons. It should not be surprising, then, to learn that the church is quite small. What is surprising is finding its consulate here in the Puddles, and not somewhere more appropriate to ecclesiastical representation, such as Temple Row in the docks, or somewhere in the Ascendant Court or Ivy districts. Nevertheless, the priests here do much work for the locals by healing the sick and repairing the worst damage to the surrounding buildings after flooding. They can be identified by their brooches, depicting the golden dragon's foot of their order. The high priest, Consulate, is almost never seen outside of the consulate, however. You know, the building itself looks so out of place to me, not even foreign, but almost alien in its presentation and contrast with the surrounding slums. But perhaps that was the objective in founding it here. Ah, and speaking of good deeds done by clerics, spy that raft ahead of us, heading northwards out of the district. I'd wager that it is one of the healing rafts that make their way to the Puddles daily, all the way from the Temple of Serenray in the Ivy district. The goddess of mercy, compassion, and redemption teaches her faithful to lift up everyone who may be saved, and so her dutiful priests send forth to the Puddles that raft each day, equipped with a lay priest and a large pot of soup. It rarely makes its way deep into the district, though, because it is immediately accosted by hungry residents on the border from Westgate. That raft is usually emptied of soup within the hour. And now, as we squelch our way northwards, I would like to take a moment to tell you about the Siphons. This is the name given to the seemingly endless and constantly evolving network of passages, sewer pipes, and abandoned or forgotten buildings that dwell just beneath the ground. Protected from easy access by the water above, going into the Siphons is usually a death sentence to anyone unfamiliar with its recent layout or unable to read the local Thieves' Guild symbology. The sewer rats, as they are known, control most of the Siphons, or so they claim. In reality, I think this ancient tunnel network answers to no one, and you will quickly find yourself facing death by exhaustion before you come across a living soul. Such a fate might be preferable to encountering one anyway, as it is just as likely to belong to a bloodthirsty beast as it is to a helpful humanoid. Sometimes, of course, it can be hard to differentiate between the two. This next building demonstrates that perfectly, and actually we should move past it quickly. Even broad daylight is not safe this close to its doors. This is Razorhall, the old district courthouse, before justice fled the Puddles. It has been taken over by the Skinsaw cult, and repurposed as a malignant temple to Norgabur, the god of secrets, thievery, and assassination. He was a human once, before passing the test of the Starstone in 1893, but as is fitting to a deity with his portfolio, not much else is known about him. But that hasn't stopped the Skinsaw cult from acting in his name, and they demonstrate their piety through acts of brutal murder. Their name conveys all too well the Skinsaw men's preferred method of execution, and the mock trials of Razorhall only add insult to injury. In full garb, a cult member is at least easily spotted, looking like a ragged jester in a leathery mask with strange lenses. Incidentally, did you know that the ignited juggler at the Astounded Abyss appeared around the same time as the Skinsaw cult took over Razorhall? Well, perhaps it is just a coincidence, but in any case, their murders have escalated recently, and pressure is rising for the Nomarch to deal with them. So far, he has been reluctant, though, because the cult has had the sense to avoid targeting the well-connected, leaving his own affairs largely unaffected. On the other side of the block that hosts Razorhall is another flourishing Puddles faction, which I think helps to explain Hygen Topkick's reluctance to act against the Skinsaw men. His thoughts are consumed instead by the Goblin King's court, which has established itself in a disused playhouse over yonder. The Goblin King himself is called Zuskut, of the Crooked Toes tribe, and he considers himself a patron of the arts here in Absalom. Indeed, many of the plays performed by his goblins there have been penned by his own hand. The theatre lies above the ground floor, which is instead dominated by the Goblin Marketplace, selling all manner of trinkets and foodstuffs, most of it scavenged from the Little Inner Sea. The location is actually quite popular with local children, goblin or otherwise, because of the lively atmosphere and relative safety guaranteed by Zuskut to those who do not challenge or seek to disrupt his little kingdom. It is quite charming, really, yet it troubles the Nomarch greatly, for the tribe's original members are all battle-hardened veterans of the violence that consumed the nation of Lastwall 4 years ago. I would not like to dwell on the history of another location just yet, but the bottom line is that Zuskut's antics are reinforced by a cunning and a resilience that might threaten Topkick's control of the district. To this day, the tribe continues to welcome new members from all over Absalom and beyond, who wish to make a name for themselves here at the city of the centre of the world. Well, we are almost out of the puddles now, and we still seem to be in one piece. As we approach the border to Westgate, take a look over your right shoulder. If you were to follow that street, taking you back towards the crossroads hosting Yargos Mission, you would first pass the Church of the Muted God. The Muted God is a fascinating individual, which is made doubly impressive given that he died long ago, failing the test of the Starstone. Uniquely, though, the thousands upon thousands of followers that he amassed in his lifetime were convinced that he had devised some secret way to bypass the test, and truly did ascend into godhood. But to this day, this long-dead human still commands the respect of his cult, who preach that their god of secrets magic enables them to fill their pockets with coin. But in reality, the church in the Puddles functions as little more than a second thieves' guild, so approach them carefully. Well, there we have it. Here is the border into Westgate, a far more optimistic district. It is mostly residential, but it does boast its titular gatehouse, which is functionally more like a keep unto itself. But if you want to learn more, you will have to wait a little longer, for it is past noon, and I have a hunger. Tell you what, head west about 2 blocks, and you will come to a street with a plethora of lifelike statues. If you get lost, ask a local to guide you to Statue Street, for that is its name. You can easily spend an hour there admiring the level of detail committed to each sculpture. Why, they could almost be real people. I will begin my tour of this typically sleepy district in about an hour from there, and you will learn the surprising truth behind their origins. Until then.